Today we will hear from our guest lecturer, Professor Fahlesa Munabari. Pak Fahlesa has done research on Hizbut Tahrir, mostly on transnational Islamic movements. He did a thesis on Hizbut Tahrir, and then for his Ph.D. he wrote on Forum Umat Islam by using social movement theories. I think you can find his works in Google Scholar. So without further ado, we invite Dr. Fahlesa.
Yes, it's good. ID.
So if you don't know,
No, I haven't.
probably you can scan the
Ladies and gentlemen, students of PhD program, it's such a great pleasure for me to be here because we were colleagues, head of study program of PhD program here at this beautiful university, a relatively new university, Dr. Syamsul Rija. I still remember that we went to a scholarship ceremonial together at the time in the Australian embassy. So we were actually at the same batch of scholarships in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And then he went to ANU and I went to University of New South Wales, but fortunately it was still in the same city. And I really appreciate Dr. Syamsul Rija. It's such a great pleasure to be invited here to have short presentations about what I have already done in the past regarding my research interests. And also Dr. Aga, we actually have today, there's a lot of similarities between myself, Dr. Rijal, and Dr. Aga. Dr. Rijal and I used to study in Canberra, and Dr. Aga was my junior at the University of New South Wales. We studied under the same supervisor, Dr. Sensei. Yes, Mas Tito, that's very interesting introductory presentations, and I really appreciate your presentation and thought. And perhaps, I'm sure that in this particular course that you have already covered some of literature regarding the correlations between Islam and social movement theories, because this is actually what we are meant to be here, right? We study social movement theories in relation to Islam as both an ideology and religion. But my background is actually not Islamic studies scholar. I belong to the Department of International Relations, but I did my master's degree in Tokyo University of Foreign Studies doing research on Hizbut Tahrir in Indonesia through the lens of social movement perspectives. And I continued my study in my PhD doing also a reformist movement. You may call it a radical movement, but of course there is a debate about that, but I would prefer to use the term of an Islamic reformist movement. The word reformist, is regarded by many scholars to be more neutral than the radical one. I did Forum Umat Islam. You may have heard about it. It was already banned, but it was led by Muhammad Al-Khattab, who is an ex-SGI leader. All right. I'm going to get it started. So what I'm going to present here is just a basic idea or basic relations between social movement theories and Islamic studies, particularly drawing some examples of Islamic groups here in Indonesia. So before we move further, so I'm going to lay definitions about what social movement is from some perspective of social movement scholars. So there are basically differences in emphasis on the way in which scholars define what constitutes social movements are. As Mas Tito earlier explained that it depends on where you see, it depends on your viewpoints, But of course there are many emphases when it comes to the definitions of social movements. Scholars have defined social movements with a variety of viewpoints, deriving from the typology of their network, their structure, and strategies. Am I blocking your view? I'm sorry. Is it okay? That's all right. And majority of scholars underscore some essential elements that characterize social movements, such as the ability to engage in sustainable collective challenges. So these are essential elements in which social movement scholars have agreed upon in order to define what social movement is. Yeah? The first is the ability to engage in sustainable collective challenges to authorities, elites, yeah? Be it political elites or social elites, and opponents. In this case, in this context, opponents of social movement groups or social movement organizations. So when I first defended my PhD proposal in the University of New South Wales, one of my supervisors asked me an interesting and important question actually. Yeah, what about FOE? Will FOE last long? So that's, basically to me as an Indonesian, something that really struck me as a PhD scholar, because I had not received that kind of questions before when I did my master's degree. Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Why? So I explained a set of arguments that I had at the time. Yeah, because Indonesia had entered democratic era, and Suharto had already fallen, and the era of democratic transition has already undergone in Indonesia. So I'm sure that it will last long. But it turned out that all of them were banned, right, by President Jokowi. But that's one of the most important aspects if you want to strengthen your argument with social movement theory. It has to have the ability to be sustainable in doing their collective challenges activities. Yeah. Against elites, against authorities, against opponents, by people with shared objectives in terms of collective actions, such as mass demonstrations, petition drive, public gatherings. There are so many forms of collective actions. Media statement or press release, and so forth, that typically employ, Dieter has already touched upon, that typically employ or use extra-institutional means of influence. In other words, it is usually an extra-parliamentary movement that, of course, is different from a political party. We're going to move to that discussion later on in the next slide. Yeah. All right. So number 2. Social movements are massive collective efforts. So these are other definitions proposed by social movement scholars. Social movements are massive collective efforts. Massive collective efforts. So massive, it has to be massive. Massive, which means that it mobilizes a lot of people, large scale people, large scale level of the quantity of people that are involved in a collective action activity, aimed at producing changes that affect the lives of many. So take a look at this viewpoint. It's a little bit different from the previous definitions. It underscores the importance of massive collective action, number 1, and number 2, producing changes. Producing changes. And also, social movements are networks. So take a look at this definition. Networks. Some scholars would like to emphasize the importance of networks. They are actually networks. They are not single organizations. But of course, it is debatable. It is still debatable, because some scholars will say that there is a social movement that consists of an individual organization. But for some other scholars, they will say that social movement is a network. It's not an individual organization. Networks of groups and organizations ready to stage mass protests for their cause and to interact with a diverse array of other actors in the public sphere, through which they vote for alliances and confront opponents. Okay, so here we go. This is the part of whether a social movement can be a political party, and whether it is normal for a social movement to participate in electoral participation. Can a social movement become a political party? Under certain and specific conditions, some political parties may feel that they are part of a movement. This is according to some scholars, and be recognized as such by other actors in the movement and by the general public. Despite it being largely restricted to political parties originated by social movements, is there any in Indonesia political party that is originated from social movement? Well, you could say PKS maybe?
Yes.
What do you think about that? PKS used to be a Tarbiyah movement, yeah? And although when PKS became a party at the time, PK, there were disagreements between Tarbiyah movement and the political party, but that's normal. But we can actually draw these examples from foreign countries in which there are labor parties and green parties. In Australia, they have Labour Party and Green Party, also in England, yeah, in some part of Western countries. So yes, of course, that happens in which a social movement, they are still social movements that operate in their own sphere, but they also have the other sphere in which part of them operate in electoral politics. Yeah? And political parties actually execute specific tasks at the level of interest participation, and in this respect are different from social movements. But the conventional wisdom holds that social movement is different from political party. The fact that there are some political parties that originate from social movements, yes, there are some some part of the world that have political parties that originate from social movement, Green Party, Labour Party, but that's not common. Even though if they do, they operate into different levels. Yeah, into different levels. So when movement decides to participate in elections, they play a different role into different systems of actions. The social movement and the party system. Yeah. Okay, so this is the cover of the book that has been presented by Mas Tito. I cannot pronounce it correctly, I don't know. I'm not from the same country of Quentin Victor. I think he's from the United States of America, but I'm not sure that he's originally from the US. Maybe his parents were from Eastern Europe or something like that.
It's Polish.
From?
It's Polish. The name is Polish. Poland.
Poland, yeah. From Polish, yeah, exactly. Quentin Victor. Okay. So yeah, well, this is a breakthrough actually. This book by Quentin is a breakthrough. All of us, even our supervisors, when we did our PhD, they also cited this book in which previously Islamic studies had been studies. The scholars of Islamic studies didn't use social movement theories when analyzing the phenomena of individual Islamic organizations, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, or Islamic Jihad in Palestine. They use historical approaches. Yeah, basically they didn't use social movement theories that were usually used by Western scholars when they do analysis on nuclear protest movements or gender movement, well, etc., etc. Yeah. So, and social movement theories have predominantly been employed to analyze a variety of new social movements in the West. Yeah, movement for civil rights in 1960s, as well as environmental, feminist, anti-war, and so on and so on and so on. And literature on Islamic movements remains isolated from the theoretical perspective of social movements. In fact, there are typically descriptive analysis of ideology, structure, objective, and histories of various Islamic movements that disregard the theoretical developments of research in social movements. So in other words, Quentin was really smart at the time in finding a research gap in the literature in Islamic studies and social movement theories. Yeah. Okay, so here in the next slide, I would like to present some theoretical perspective of social movements that are commonly used in order to analyze a variety of social movements phenomena or activities in the world. Yeah. Political opportunity structure. We actually have three political opportunity structures. Resource mobilization that Mas Tito has already explained in his presentation, or the newer versions of resource mobilization theory is called mobilizing structures. They're actually similar. And the last theory that is very commonly used is framing. So what is political opportunity structure? Political movements everywhere in the world do not operate effectively. Yeah? And the ebb and flow of their activism is closely dependent upon a number of dimensions and circumstances unique to a regime or to a political context or to a social context in an environment to which they belong. So this is actually one of the most important factors in the perspective of political opportunity structure. In Indonesia, this also happened. Hizb ut-Tahrir. When was Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia born? When did it emerge? When was actually it? When was it actually operating underground?
1970s.
1970s, yeah, 1980s, yeah, 1980s in the era of President Suharto. Actually, Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia has already existed since the beginning of 1980s, but just they operated clandestinely underground. They didn't have what this perspective says. They didn't have the political opportunity to emerge. Why? Because the social and political context at the times under President Suharto in Indonesia didn't allow them to emerge. Of course, they did have a lot of activities. They did preaching activities among students at campuses in Indonesia, but of course they did that clandestinely, and they never claimed that they were Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia, which is very interesting. If you read the history of Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia and Tarbiyah movement, they actually used to do the preaching activities together in ITB campus in Bogor or in ITB in Bandung together. But it was not until the beginning of the year 2000 when Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia for the first time launched a movement, this activity in tennis indoor stadium Jakarta, that Hizb ut-Tahrir members realized, oh my goodness, so what we have learned so far was Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia's thoughts, was Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia's books. So they didn't realize when they had, when they belonged to certain discussion circles or halaqah, yeah, they didn't realize that the materials that they learned were from Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is very interesting. Yeah. Okay, and Sidney Terry, one of the most influential scholars of social movement, defined political opportunity structure as consistent, but not necessarily formal, permanent, or national signals to social or political actors which either encourage or discourage. So these are the key points. Which either encourage or discourage them to use their internal resources to form social movement. Okay, and here are some of the elements. The first is the opening of access to power. This refers to the availability of opportunity for social movement to emerge and engage in various types of collective actions within the political structure to which they are attached. I already gave you an example of Hizb ut-Tahrir Indonesia in 1980s and 1990s, yeah, and shifting alignment within the polity, the instability of political alignments, which is tantamount to electoral instability in a pluralist democracy system in which there is more than one center of power, such as the case of Indonesia at the moment, yeah, when the biggest political party, PDIP, has been in power since President Joko Widodo was elected in 2014, yeah, 2014, the first period of President Jakarta, and PDIP has been in power since 2014, right? So there has been a shifting pattern of power, yeah, and the Democratic Party in the era SPY that really highlighted the importance of guaranteeing the atmosphere of democracy, freedom of speech, was then changed to, what we call a more controlled freedom of expressions in Indonesia. So basically, that is understandable under PDIB, which is not an Islamic country. Which is not an Islamic political party. It is a secular political party. There's some part of Christian elements in the PDIB. It is quite understandable to me and to other political Islam scholars in Indonesia that few this kind of movements, Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, Front Pembela Islam, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, Forum Umat Islam, led by Muhammad Al-Khattab, ex-HTI leader, thought that this is something that actually attract to Indonesian democracy, to Indonesia as a nation state, what we call NKRI in Indonesian term, Negara Kesatuan Republik Indonesia. This is a threat because look at their ideology. Their ideology is transnational Islam, transnational Islam. Of course, this is part of an example of the element number 2, shifting alignments within political elites in the country. And element number 3, emerging splits within elites. This could also be a contributing factor. Divisions among elites help provide incentive to emerging movements. The availability of influential allies, influential allies help provide movements with incentive to take collective actions. Imagine what if Prabowo, let's say, won the 2019 elections? There could be an emerging opportunity, political opportunity for HTI, for example, to re-emerge, right, after it was banned in 2017. Do you think that would be possible? Let's say that if Prabowo won the 2019 election, well, it depends on the availability of influential allies. We do realize that just before the 2019 Indonesian presidential elections, Prabowo was trying to seek support from Islamic elements that included FPI, including Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia. Element number 5, the state's capacity or will to repress dissent. The degree of the state's capacity or will to repress dissent determines the opportunity of social movements to emerge and engage in collective action. This is, to me, an interesting theory, an interesting perspective in order to analyze the current situations in which, although Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia has already been banned in 2017 by the President Joko Widodo regimes, but actually it is still spreading its da'wah. It is still spreading its preaching activities through its changed bulletin. The title of its bulletin has changed from Bulletin Al-Islam and to Bulletin Kafah. There is a website of Bulletin Kafah, you can Google it. And also other tabloids, the social medias of Hizbut Tahrir are still active. But why are they not afraid of spreading their da'wah? If you want to compare it with the situations in, for example, the 1980s or 1990s, under the regime of President Suharto. Of course, the answer lies to this 5th element. The state's capacity or will to repress dissent is different. The situation is pretty much different between Suharto's regimes and the democratic era of Indonesia under both SBY and Jokowi. Yes, Jokowi doesn't like Islamic radical movements operating in Indonesia, but the capacity or the tendency to repress dissent is considered to be way lower in this current regime compared to the previous regime of Indonesia, particularly during the Suharto regime. Okay, this is May 1998, the demise of President Suharto. Soon upon the demise of President Suharto on the 21st of May 1998, the level of political emergence increased, facilitating the emergence of Islamic movements to come to the open. Among them were Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, Front Pembela Islam, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. These are some pictures of them. Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Sorry. Stop working. Convenient CD. So this is Hizbut Tahrir, yeah? This is Hizbut Tahrir. The Front Pembela Islam is you're very familiar. And this is Majelis Mujahidin. All of them proclaim their emergence after the fall of President Soeharto. So the second perspective that is usually used by social movement scholars is mobilizing structure, which is very similar to the resource mobilization theory that was touched upon by Mas Tito earlier. Yeah. Well, the dimensions of political opportunity structure is very important. It's very important to the emergence and activisms of social movements to engage in collective action. A favorable political opportunity for movements alone cannot translate their aspirations into sustained mass demonstration in the streets. And other related activities such as expanding networks, forming alliances, and confronting opponents without the ability to mobilize essential resources. However few and whatever type, that has already been mentioned by Mas tutorial. Money, for example, but money is not the only one, of course. Support base is also important. Support base. If you are from Muhammadiyah family, then most likely, if you are one of the members of FPI or HTI, most likely the first area, the closest relative that you most likely invite them to join your movement is your family, isn't it? Yeah. And that is from Muhammad. This also is the case with Nahdlatul. Yeah. And mobilizing structure is defined as collective vehicles. Informal as well as formal, through which people mobilize and engage in collective action. In a more detailed manner, it is argued that the concept of mobilizing structure is referred to as a means of taking part in collective action that employs a variety of social networks such as family, neighbors, friends, your mass organizations affiliation with Nahdlatul Ulama or Muhammadiyah or any other Islamic mass organizations. Mobilizing structures underscore the necessity of societal support and the wide array of resources that must be mobilized, including but not limited to people, money, knowledge. Knowledge is also important. Frames. Take a look at this. One of the elements in mobilizing structure. Frame is going to be the term of perspective in social movement. But if you don't have the resources of frame, it will be very difficult for any particular movement to advance. And skills, of course. Alright, so support base of the post-Soeharto Islamic refugee movements in Indonesia. HTI, most of HTI support base was drawn from students of big campuses in Indonesia. IPB, they first succeeded in mobilizing support in Institute of Agriculture in Bogor, IPB in Bogor. And then other big campuses in Java. FBI, what about FBI? It has centered around the profile of Habib Rizik. Di sini ada Habib juga.
We're still contesting. Pray for our advancement.
Dr. Rijal's research has been on Habib. Is he Habib? Original Habib or not?
He is working on the methodology.
I'm working on it.
Okay. So it's very good. It's very, very good and relevant with Dr. Rijal.
Yeah. I'm fond of him.
Oh.
I admire him.
he has published many journal articles about Habib in Indonesia. One, his work has been an original contribution to Habib studies in Indonesia. We're very lucky to be supervised by Dr. Dekan. Alright, FBI is the profile of FBI has been centered around the profile of Habib Rizik Sihab. Rizik Sihab. The title of Habib is, of course, I don't have to explain it here because I'm sure all of you know the title of Habib. What it means to be Habib? And so basically, participants of fraternity study circles held by Rizik Sihab in the Tambora, Tanah Abang, Central Jakarta. Most of them, not all of them, but the majority of them are unemployed. Many of them were tasked in search of spiritual support. But of course, there are some also kiai, with pesantren backgrounds that also join FBI as second layer of API leaders. And MMI, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, students of religious school Pesantren Abu Bakar Ba'asyir. Abu Bakar Ba'asyir is the next leader of Jamaah Islamiyah, one of the most popular terrorist organizations claimed by the CIA operating in Southeast Asia. And FUI, or Forum Umat Islam, this one is less familiar than STI and FBI, but in fact, its activities were prominent actually. From the year of 2005 to the year of 212 movement, before FBI was eventually banned, FUI's activities were actually very, very prominent in the media, in the street as well, through their collective actions. It was led by ex-HDI leader Muhammad Al-Khadir. This is actually my dissertation topic. My PhD thesis topic is about FUI, Forum Umat Islam. So, where does FUI draw its support base? Of course, from HDI. So basically, ex-HDI members, or for those who were disappointed by HDI decisions leading to the Monas incident on the 1st June of 2008. Do you still remember the Monas incident in 2008? Then the headquarters of Hizbut Tahrir in the Middle East issued the decisions that Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia has to separate from FUI. They have to dissociate themselves from FUI. That is in order from the headquarters of Hizbut Tahrir in the Middle East. So these unhappy members then form and join Forum of Islam, or the Forum of Islamic Community. Alright, and this is the term, theoretical perspective that is commonly used by academics doing research on social movements. Framing. Social movements do not merely rely on favorable political opportunities and resources to mount attacks. In fact, to boost the political impacts of their actions, movements need to develop frames. Through which, the movement will not only construct their core identity that makes them off from their opponents, but also transmit messages that will resonate across multiple layers of audiences and tap into the collective memory of the public. Imagines of the sexy phrases of Hizbut Tahrir when it's still operating in the street of Indonesia. What kind of phrase that struck in your mind when they stage a mass protest? Khilafah? Sharia and Khilafah, right? The Caliphate, the Sharia and the Caliphate, right? That is the frame of Hizbut Tahrir that actually marks Hizbut Tahrir off from other social movement organizations in Indonesia. So what about API? What kinds of sexy frame that is actually is trying to advance? The FH was trying to advance when still operating, when it is still active. The popular frames of framing
from formulation. That is FUI. That is Forum of Islamic Community, right?
Maksiat, pemberantas maksiat.
Amar Ma'ruf.
Amar
Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar belongs to FBI. Don't forget about that. So, if Western scholars really like to use the phrase of forbidding evil, enjoining good, and forbidding evil. Enjoining good, Amar Ma'ruf, yeah? Forbidding evil, Nahi Munkar. That's actually the key phrase of FBI as a social movement. So whenever it did its activities, it was still active. So basically, its overall activities were centered around this particular framing. And as for the FUI, the Forum of Islamic Community is NKRI Bersyariah. The NKRI Bersyariah is actually a metamorphosis, a transformation of HTI framing, which is the caliphate, yeah. But Muhammad al-Khattab, as the next HTI leader, thought that the caliphate is too transformational. He later doesn't like it, because he had an opinion that if we were to mobilize people, if we were to attract supporters from Indonesia, from Indonesian Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah, we could not advance the idea of transnational caliphate. It would be backfired, So he formulated the idea of NKRI Bersyariah, or in other words, Sharia that is based on Indonesia. Yeah, Sharia. This Sharia version is not transnational, guys. Yeah, that's actually what FUI was trying to convey to Indonesian public. NKRI Bersyariah is a nationalist version of Sharia. Yeah. No, it's not. There's no communism. But it's transformations of the transnational entity, but with the more nationalist tone. Yeah. Okay, so here are stages of framing. Robert Benford and Snow developed three core framing concepts to explain how ideology and symbols work in the surface of social movement. The first is diagnostic framing. At this initial stage, movements constructed and developed frames that deal with the functions of targeting blame, and attributing responsibility. In other words, naming grievances. Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia also did this kind of stage of framing. So what kind of Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia did when it executed diagnostic framing? Who was the culprit? The government. Dr. Rabi is correct. The government has always been the culprit. Has always been the wrong element in their concept that has to be blamed. The government, which is very natural for you who are familiar with Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia's ideology, that it always tries to delegitimize government, because what they want to do, they actually want to topple the government, right? They actually want to topple the government of Indonesia, and not only Indonesia, governments all over the world in which they operate, they want to topple them, right? And after they topple government, what they will do? In their mind, they will change the government with a new government that is based on the caliphate system and based on the complete version of Sharia according to their interpretations. Yeah. So the government of Indonesia in this context, has always been the target of blame in the eyes of Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia. And the second stage is prognostic framing. It deals with the primary task of offering solutions, to the problem that they have already targeted, including planning a protest or attack along with tactics on how to execute the plan. And for FBI, the stage of number one, who can you please mention some examples of the targets of FBI when it still was active, in the streets of Indonesia? What did FBI usually target? Yeah, bad thoughts. Yeah. Maksiat, vice, social vice. Social vice is their, their framing. Yeah. They always targeted nightclubs. The manifestations of social vice. Yeah, nightclubs. Gambling center. And so on and so on. Even if international singers or actresses plan to come to Indonesia to perform a concert, right? The Playboy, whenever international women singers who wanted to come to Indonesia to perform a concert, then before that, FBI was already in the streets of Indonesia through their collective action, staging a huge mass protest in the street of Jakarta. Yeah. Okay. And so number two is solutions. Okay. After you name grievance, after you target a blame, and then what you do? You offer solution to problems. Yeah. With tactics on how to execute the plan. All right. So as for STI, what are the solutions that STI offers to the public of Indonesia? Yes, the caliphate in China. Yeah, the caliphate. So, alright, okay. So the government, for example, this is part of rhetoric that they used to explain in Indonesian media when it was still active, before it was banned. One of the examples, for example, if the government just raise gasoline fuels, for example, and basically always criticize whatever Indonesian government policies. Look at the government raise the fuels. This is not a good policy. It is not pro-people policy, right? And then, okay, so what is your solution? The caliphate! Whatever policies that the Indonesian government issued, these policies must have been criticized by STR, right? Because they wanted to delegitimize government, right? And the only solution is the caliphate. Yeah. And also the FBI, the stage number 2 will be manifested in the rhetoric of the Sharia version of FBI. Of course, it's different from the Sharia version of the HDI. Alright, motivational framing. The last stage of framing, it provides a rationale for engaging in collective actions, motivating the bystander public to transform into adherence. This task includes the formulating of an array of apt and powerful vocabularies that, when adopted and exposed by the adherents, it will help sustain their participants in the various forms of municipal protest. Alright, students, Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia is the most organized Islamic and Fakultas movements in the world. Many scholars have agreed on that. Yeah. And the organizational structure of HTI, FBI, and other Islamic movements are so different that you can easily notice that HTI is really well organized in their activities, in their organizations, in their publications through their media. Yeah. So they can actually provide justifications when they do mass protests to Indonesian public. Yeah. Why you have to support us, for example? Why you have to support the caliphate? Because if we were under the caliphate, the education fees will not be, as students. Students do not have to pay tuition fee. It will be covered by the caliphate. Yeah. And of course, the caliphate will guarantee job opportunities for his ummah, and so on and so on and so on. This kind of rhetoric is quite well translated into their justifications through their rhetoric that is conveyed through its array of media, because it has a lot of media from a bulletin, a weekly bulletin, to a fortnightly tabloid. It also has a TV channel. It also has a monthly magazines online, and so on and so on. So these are some pictures of their protests. And KRI Bersyariah, Dr. Rijal,
as mentioned, it belongs to the Forum of Islam, FPI, the Forum of Islamic Community, and this is Islamic Kafah, Islam Kafah, Sharia and Technique. This is very important. Look at this. Drugs, yeah, alcohol, part of social vice, yeah, vice, maksiat, yeah, maksiat. This is part of maksiat. You can name it. You can name it. Drugs, alcohol, pornography as well. It belongs to that. All right. So this is going to be my last slide, and I look forward to discussions here after these. After the banning of STI in 2017, the movement's activism is still running underground, yeah, as I touched on earlier. Changing the names of these publications such as Bulletin Kafah and Tabloid Media One, for example. So what is the moral story of this phenomenon? Yeah. One of the theories of social movements actually is applicable in this particular context for political opportunity structure. The first social movement theory that I already presented earlier is actually applicable to explaining the underground activities of Hizb ut-Tahrir after its emergence in the beginning of 2000 and before. This is like a re-undergrounding of HCA, if you may. The re-undergrounding of STI's activities because of the political opportunity structure theory. Yeah. But one of the most important differences is that it's still spreading its dawah and it's not afraid of the government's repression. Why? Because they are quite smart in seeing the political situations nowadays in Indonesia. That the political situation nowadays in Indonesia is really different. This is from the Suharto's era. In Suharto's era, if you gather with some of your radical friends, you will be easily captured by the Indonesian police and put you in jail. But not now. The level of repression is still lower. It's still considered lower to the era of President Suharto. Yeah. So FBI, Front Pembela Islam, Islamic Defenders Front, on the other hand, claimed that it was planning to change the name of this organization to Front Saudara Islamic. It's still FBI, but it consists or it stands for Front Saudara Islam. However, its activism is far less passive than its predecessor. Why? Because FBI, its resources, its framing, all of their organizational resources are centered around the charismatic profile of this basic Shihab, the supreme leader of FBI. And we all know that Rizik Shihab has been detained by Indonesian government several years ago. For the case of course, that was some of scholars or some of Indonesian observers call it the criminalizations of Rizik Shihab, whatever you want to name it, but that was the fact that happened, that the government didn't like FBI because it always criticized President Jokowi, and Habib Rizik was detained for several years. I think he has been released from jail, no?
Bail.
On bail. On bail, yeah. On a bail, yeah, dengan jaminan, of course, yeah. But when an organization that heavily relies on the role and charismatic profile of its leader, the ebb and flow of these organizations will automatically rely on the security or the safety of its particular leader. But when Rizik Shihab is not detained, Rizik Shihab who actively led FBI's mass demonstrations everywhere. But when he was detained, it really cripples the activities of FBI. But this is something that's different from STI. STI doesn't rely on its leader. It's a highly ideological Islamic liberalism movement that never relies on any specific leader to advance its cause. I think that's all. And I look forward to any comments.
Thank you, Dr. Fahlesa, for insightful lecture. So we hope your explanation or some theories, maybe also explore some examples for the leading Islamic organization in Indonesia like FBI and Sosial Indonesia. So of course there are many questions maybe from you. So we open floor for Q&A. Questions, comments, or you want to relate to your thesis, for example, project. Yeah, we can't use it. That's framing is a bit easier.
It's not good. Right now it's been contested, so we have to prove it first. My question is about how do you locate these movements in terms of their transnational network? Do you see, for instance, FBI, HTI, and FUI as the same Islamic movements with the transnational agenda network, or no? There are different levels of their connection with the transnational network. That's the first question. And then the second, do you see do you see interlocking with this movement? Because if you see FBI, for instance, this is more of a this is an Islamic movement with a more traditionalist base. Because when we see FBI, it centers around Habib figure, and in Betawi or Betawi community, who are mostly admirer of Habib, it's very different from HTI in that sense. So how do you categorize these movements in terms of first transnational agenda and their ideology, traditionalist versus modernist, or there is a third or hybrid category? Thank you.
So we move to the next question, or should I answer that?
I just want to ask one question. You did mention that when the movement decide to participate in this action, they play a different role in two different system action. First, the social movement, and second, political party system. I don't know if it's right example or not. If you refer to Nasdem when they were still just gerakan restorasi, everybody will consider them as social movement. But when they become a political party, I don't think everybody will consider them playing two roles as social movement and political party at the same time. How do you see that phenomenon?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have two questions.
Thank you very much. How do Musa if I may call you All right, which one is more transnational? Which one is the most transnational movement? I will say that, of course, without any hesitancy, that Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia is the most transnational Islamic Republic movement in the world, not only in Indonesia. Why? Because, well, this is not only me who is saying that, but also other scholars of Hizbut Tahrir International also say the same thing as my argument. Yeah, because it has actually an international hierarchy, students. Yeah, that it also has a headquarters in a specific country in the Middle East. They never open to the public. They never disclose their headquarters locations. Maybe, perhaps,
in Jordan or in Palestine, but yes, it has provincial structure, and provincial structure in their eyes is a country. Yeah, in the real sense, it's a country. For example, they have a provincial branch of Indonesia. It means that it's Bundari Indonesia. They have a provincial branch in Australia. It means that it's Bundari Australia, and so on and so on and so on. And they have a strict hierarchical organizations and order. This is quite similar to the Communist Party, actually, in the sense of that kind of hierarchical order. Leninist Party, Communist Party, the way they organize themselves is pretty much similar. So what about FBI? FBI is local movement, in my opinion. Yeah, its ideology is also, its ideology is actually, Habib Rizik's ideology is Nahdlatul Ulama. I mean, he was raised from Nahdlatul Ulama's family background, Habib, yeah, but of course, Habib's religious teachings are very familiar to what has been taught by Nahdlatul Ulama. And yes, I wouldn't say that FBI is a transnational Islamic movement. It has networks with some Habaib in Yemen, yes, but does it mean that it is considered to be a transnational movement? When we want to consider a single or an individual movement to be a transnational movement, it has to fulfill such criteria as it has a routine or regular communications and a hierarchical order, that facilitates their regular command, regular communication and coordination. But that doesn't happen. Yes, Habib Rizik knows somebody from Hadramaut, for example, of course. Yeah. Habib Rizik's ancestors are from Hadramaut, something that nobody can deny. But it doesn't mean that organizationally they have relations, with some organizations in the Middle East or in other parts of Muslim countries. Majlis Mujahideen. What about Majlis Mujahideen? Majlis Mujahideen, it may have some sort of international connections, in my opinion, but it's limited to the Jamaah Islamiyah network. We know that the emergence of and the development of Majlis Mujahideen in Indonesia at the beginning of 2000s in Indonesia, in post-Suharto Indonesia, was really influenced by Abu Bakar Bashir and his colleague. Siapa satu lagi? The leader of Jamaah Islamiyah, who passed away after he landed in Indonesia, together with Abu Bakar Bashir. Abdullah Sungkar. Yes, thank you. Abdullah Sungkar. Well, they were leaders of Jamaah Islamiyah. But of course, Jamaah Islamiyah, don't forget, the founders of Jamaah Islamiyah were Abdullah Sungkar and Abu Bakar Bashir. So basically, their networks were limited to their students, yes, and their students after they fled to Malaysia in the beginning of in the beginning of 1980s, yes, were students from Malaysia, were students from other countries in Southeast Asia, from southern Philippines, from southern Thailand. So if you want to consider that kind of aspect in order to put Majlis Mujahideen as one of the criteria of transnational movement, I would say yes, but the transnational network of Majlis Mujahideen is limited to Southeast Asia, particularly Muslim countries in Southeast Asia. But as for Majlis Mujahideen Indonesia, I cannot say that this organization is the same as Jamaah Islamiyah. There are differences in terms of the development of ideology of Abu Bakar Bashir. In fact, Abu Bakar Bashir had disagreements with some of the Bali Comings actors. Imam Samudra, they had difference of opinions whether it was allowed to form Bali, for example, and so on and so on. There is
a development of ideology, of thinking that had been underway after Abu Bakar Bashir and Abdullah Soka landed in Indonesia and decided to establish political project in Indonesia. As for the FUI, the Forum of Islamic Community, Forum of Islamic Community is a nationalist movement. It doesn't have any connections with the Hizb ut-Tahrir international structure. The emergence of FUI, it happened in 2005 because the political opportunity or situations at that time allowed the emergence or the flourishing of this kind of alliance or this kind of variant. Yeah. So basically, FUI consists of SDI and FBI and MMI and Jamaah and some other Islamic movements. It's an umbrella movement. But who pioneered that movement? Who pioneered the FUI? Who actually established the FUI? The social movement entrepreneur. We call that what? We have that kind of term in the social movement theory. We call it the social movement entrepreneur. The important individual who is playing a very important role in mobilizing support. In this case, the leader of FUI is from HTI, HTI. HTI is Indonesia is the leader of FUI. It was HTI who mobilized support. It was HTI that convinced FBI to join FUI. It was HTI that convinced MMI to join FUI. Yeah, Ismail Yusanto, Muhammad Al-Khattab were considered to be the social movement entrepreneur at the time. But then, because of the worst incident in 2008, HTI pulled out of the FUI. Yeah? And so, after the pulling out of HTI, what happened? FUI has been, since 2008, a pure nationalist or local Islamic movement that doesn't have any transnational network. I think that's my opinion. What you said? Did that answer your question? And I think we have question number 2. Yeah. Yes. Similarities.
Ideological inclination.
Oh yeah. Sure. Ideological similarities. Are they similar or not? Well, framing. I would like to show you the framing here. This is the framing here. The Caliphate version of HTI is different from the Caliphate version of FPI. The Sharia version of HTI is different. So, I've interviewed Muhammad Al-Khattab many times when I did my good work, and I really know that Sihab and FBI didn't agree with the concept of transnational khilafah. The fact that transnational khilafah is something that is written down in Hadith or maybe in Quran, yes, but he didn't agree. Basically, Sihab didn't agree that the appropriate model of the Caliphate in Indonesia would be the transnational Caliphate. So, in other words, FBI didn't go so far as to call for the re-establishment of the Caliphate in Indonesia. Dia tak mau sampai jauh ke sana. Tak mau sampai ke Caliphate FBI. FBI is only concerned with the doing good and forbidding evil, particularly the forbidding evil aspect of Asia, the vice, eradication of vice. That is his concern. But of course, when FBI joined FUI from the period of 2005 to the period of 2017, before the HDI was banned, of course they agreed on certain things. Both FBI and HDI, HTI and FPI, they both agreed on something. Yeah, when they wanted to stage a mass protest together, they had a prior discussion between their leaders. Okay, what kind of issue that we want to raise? All right, HDI agree and FBI agree. All right, so we agreed on something. Let's do it. Let's do a mass protest, for example. But when you ask me whether FBI agrees on the concept of HDI, Caliphate, no. Because the model of FBI's Sharia is this one. NKRI bersyariah. NKRI bersyariah is actually a phrase that is formulated by Muhammad Al-Khattab, the next HDI leader. And Muhammad Al-Khattab, the good thing about Muhammad Al-Khattab is that he's very good at convincing other leaders. Yeah? He's quite good in convincing Rizik Shihab to adopt his idea. So this is actually his idea that is supported by Rizik Shihab. Rizik Shihab supported this idea. NKRI bersyariah. Which is why, whenever FUI, the Forum of Islamic Community, whenever they stage mass protests, they have a lot of masses, followers in the street. Do you think where these masses came from? Did they come from HDI? No. Muhammad Al-Khattab no longer had a lot of followers at that time. A lot of followers came from the members of HDI. Yeah. And MMI, Majlis Mujahidin Indonesia, they have their own interpretation of Sharia, they have their own specific goals. They don't want to go so far as to re-establish the caliphate in Indonesia for the short period of time. They just want to implement a certain version of Sharia in the positive law of Indonesia. That is one of the most important rules of Majlis Mujahidin Indonesia. They just want to implement Sharia as the normal, as the positive law in Indonesian criminal law. Dalam kitab-kitab undang-undang hukum pidana, maunya cuma sampai sebatas itu saja. Oke,
Little follow up.
Yes.
Then FTI and FUI and MMI still believe in the state, and wants Islamization from top down.
Yes, exactly.
But on the other hand, HTI oppose the state and wants the Islamization come from bottom up. That's, I think,
STI
can summarize your.
Well, STI wants to topple the government of Indonesia and wants to topple every government in the world actually. STI aspires a transnational caliphate, but of course it utilizes the freedom of expression that Indonesia has, right? Because it benefits from freedom of expression. Through democracy that Indonesia is now adopting, through the freedom of expression that Indonesia is adhering to, actually benefits is within Indonesia. Before it was banned in 2017. But actually, deep inside their mind, deep inside their heart, they really want to topple the Indonesian government and change it replace it with the country. But this is not the case with FPI, Habib. This is not the case with FUI. Oh, they don't want to topple the government. Okay. They're very actually just Thank you. Thank you. And then, alright, can I answer the next question? Yeah. Dari siapa tadi? Boleh tahu Mas siapa? Mas Fahlesa. Alright, Mas Fahlesa. Thank you very much for the question. Nasdem, yeah? Nasdem. What was the name of the social movement of Nasdem before it became a political party? National Democrat? Is it National Democrat there? As far as I remember, the name of the social movement was National Democrat before it transformed into Nasdem. Nasdem is the name of the political party. That's a very good question. And I'm going to have a question to you as well. So, did National Democrat as a social movement still exist? Apakah National Democrat sebagai gerakan sosial masih ada? No, right? That's the answer. It no longer existed. The National Democrat as a social movement, as the embryo of the current Nasdem as a political party, no longer existed. So it has fully transformed into a political party. So it's a bit different. The system is a bit different if you compare between Tarbiyah movement and PKS. And then I think Tarbiyah movement later on took a different tact from PKS. They have some differences, in their ideology and their political orientation, between the two. So there are now two different things: Tarbiyah movement and the PKS. As for the Nasdem, I believe that the social movement that was
that used to be the embryo of Nasdem political party has no longer existed. So, of course, it has fully transformed into a political party. There's no longer social movement by the name of National Democracy. Gak ada lagi kan? Jadi selesai masalahnya. Iya kan?
They exist to declare, only to declare that there is a movement. But then the movement become political party.
And then the movement dissolve itself after the Nasdem political party proclaimed its emergence. But this situation is different with Labour Party, for example, in England, in Australia. Their social movement still exists. The political party still exists, but they have two different, levels of operations, of activities. Green Party, their social movement is still active, and they're political. They are also political party. I don't think that we can find similar things, or the situations like Labour Party and Green Party in Indonesia, in which social movement and political parties are the same, and they are running together. They're existing together and trying to mobilize support together, although they have the two different levels. It doesn't exist in Indonesia.
I'm wondering, in the context of Indonesia democracy, as we also have a freedom of expression, freedom of speech, in the International democracy, I'm wondering how do you think that this condition, situation, bring the advantage and disadvantage of the creative requirement of possibilities?
Alright. Thank you, Mr. That's also fascinating. I don't know whether it's relevant to me to answer that. Maybe Habib Rijal will be able to answer that, or maybe Dr. But of course, I'm going to give my short comments on that. Yeah. From the perspective of social movement, Mas Tito, whether it brings benefit to the current situations of Indonesia, in which the current President Joko Widodo has banned at least two Islamic Republic movements, which were HDI and FDI, right? To me, it depends on the movement itself, Mas Tito and friends. Yeah. Whether a social movement wants to resist this decision or not, the banning decisions of President Joko Widodo. Hizbut Tahrir fights back this policy by doing its clandestine operation. The second version of its clandestine operation that it used to do in the era of Suharto, but with a different situation. Yeah. But for FBI actually has got a lot of opportunities. Yeah. It has already claimed that it changed their name, right? But dari Front Pembela Islam, from Front Pembela Islam to Front Persaudaraan Islam. But have you seen any of these significant activities lately in the media? Yeah. So this is a clear example of how two Islamic organizations differ, from the way in which they mobilize their resources. HDI is very good at mobilizing resources, and FDI is not good at all. So, well, if your question is that whether the current democratic systems in the current regime of President Joko Widodo in Indonesia brings any benefits to Islamic Republic movement, I would say that it really boils down, or it depends on how the movements would like to respond to the current political opportunity. Yeah. Taking an example of Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, look at this. They're still doing their activities. They're still spreading their dawah. They're not afraid of repression. But they're just not claiming that they're Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia. They're just not claiming that they're operating openly. But they're doing these activities, guys. They have meetings, they have gatherings.
but not in the public. Must be some influence it is in the government. No, in the government, no. They don't rely on the government. Whether they invite government officials to adopt their ideology, that is possible. I mean, there are some cases in which some government officials were proven to be involved in peace as HGI member or as HGI sympathizers, and they were fired from the positions in the as government officials. Yes, but well, yeah. The point is that the most important point in this context is that they are still really active at spreading their preaching. Yeah. But of course underground, they never think that they're active, because if some government officials ask them whether you're still active, no, of course they will say that you're not active, you have been banned. But in the internet sphere, you can easily say their social media are still active, their bulletins are still active, media, what is Felix Ismail Santo in their media is still present. But why are not they afraid? Because the level of repression is different. I repeat here again. The level of repression is different. Yeah. Element number 5. The state's will to repress dissent. The level of state's repression is different. If you want to compare with the current government and the situations under President Soeharto,
Yeah.
So my question is my question is bit cheap. So
what do you mean by your question is bit cheap?
it's simple. I believe that someone would say that the question is really cheap, but it's just asking about the findings that we made on the field after your interview, whether his movement driven off from ideology or from political or economic factors. Which one is more influential, according to your findings after your interviewing him personally?
Oh, all right. Was it really more driven by ideological factors or
politics or economy? I mean, either of them. Which one is more influential?
As for STI or FUI?
In case of FUI.
FUI.
Specific.
And I think before that, I'm interested to know how did you approach the origin collection.
Alright. Yeah. Alright. Alright. So it's very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
How to this high level.
I would like to get in touch with you. Just send me a message here. Who knows that I can, somehow connect you with some of Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia activists. Hopefully, yes. But Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia is very restrictive in its nature. Not everyone can have the opportunity to interview these activists. Hizbut Tahrir is very restrictive towards interviewers. So whenever students, at the time, whenever students want to send a letter asking permission to interview the leaders, the leaders would have to filter, would have to review the request, because they were afraid that this might be from Indonesia's being, from Indonesian intelligence, Indonesian spies, Indonesian intelligence undercover. They were very cautious in the sense that, when I did my field work, the only person that was even the authority to respond to interviewers was Ismail Santo as the national public person. Activists other than Ismail Santo were actually not allowed to respond to interviewers. So yes, it is difficult, but I'm lucky enough because I got to know with Muhammad Al-Khattab at the time. Yeah, it's a long story. It dates back to the year before 2000. But I managed it. Yeah, somehow I managed it. Yeah, Muhammad Al-Khattab. So my entry point is actually Muhammad Al-Khattab. So from Muhammad Al-Khattab, I got to know with Ismail Samson. Yeah. So from these two leaders, I think it was enough for me to get many information and data about Internasional Indonesia and as well as FUI, Forum of Islamic Community. Yeah. Whether FUI was more driven by ideological factors or funding or economic factor, yeah. I mean material benefits, yeah, material benefits. Well, I'm not sure that the most promising motivations among activists or followers of this kind of organizations or movements is material benefits. I'm not sure what kind of material benefits that they will get out of it.
Because they are facing economic chaos only the economics or the funding is very difficult to settle themselves in terms of their economic life. Then they go to that mode.
Okay, yeah, I get the point. I get it. As for FBI, it could be yes. Yeah, for example, unemployed people tax. Yeah, they were so-called secured by Habib Rizik Sihab. They were given security. They were given some motivation, some protection by Rizik Sihab, some motivational words, yeah, sermons. Yeah, if you call it material benefits, but for STI, well, I would doubt that the majority of STI activists and members and sympathizers will be willing to join these organizations because of material benefits. In fact, they have to pay their monthly donations to the STI. I believe that Dr. Rijal, before he did research on Habib, or Habai, Dr. Rijal was also doing research on HTI. I believe that STI was your master's research, right? Yeah. So I believe that it's not because of material benefits that motivate them to join this kind of actions. It is. This is also the case with the motivational factors that drive people to join Islamic family. It's all over the world. I mean, they believe in their cause, they believe in their ideology, they believe that their ideology can make a better change to the world. Yeah, they believe that ideology is adhered to by any organization that they are involved will, have meaningful consequences to society. That's my question. That's my answer. I hope that you may not be satisfied with the answer to that. According to my experience when I did field work, interviewing HTR leaders, FUR leaders, the followers, because the followers of HTI, it's really difficult for STI members to be considered HTI members. They have to go through a lot of selection processes that are closely monitored by their supervisors, by their Muslim field, by their supervisors.
Similar to one.
Yeah, quite similar to one, So if you happen to know someone who claims that I'm an STI member, so you have to be cautious. Whether they are really STI member or just a self-proclaimed STI member. I happened to interview an ex-HTI member at the time, and he told me his story. So it took him about 6 years to be considered to be an STI member. You can imagine 6 years just to become an STI member. How come? If I now want to join Nasdem political party, I just have to go there to their headquarters, right? And fill out their form. I want to be a member of Nasdem.
If you have much money, you can join the HDI.
This is many schools also say that STI is like a communist party. It's like a Leninist party. Very, very rigid. Very well organized. Very ideological organization. Yeah. As for FBI, yeah, that could be. Yeah. FBI is different, FBI is, in many ways, are really different from STI, I would say. Yeah, because, for example, unemployed people tax, in Indonesia we call tema, they need some protection. They need some level of protection. So maybe they also, when they get the opportunity to be close to Habib, like Habib Rizik, the popular Habib Rizik, they feel spiritual satisfactory. They're satisfied spiritually to be able to be in the same religious discussion circle with the prominent D65. This is the kind of spiritual benefit for them. I wouldn't say that's natural benefit, but spiritual benefit. Yes, but STI never claims that. STI denies that. I already reviewed some of literature from historians saying that Taqiuddin Al-Albani, before he established his Buddha in Indonesia, he joined the Muslim Brotherhood. But when I asked for confirmation from STI leaders, they denied. Of course, that's natural. Yeah. But according to some historians who already read on the history of the Muslim Brotherhood and STI, sorry, that is Hizbut Tahrir, Taqiuddin Al-Albani used to be an activist of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Taqiuddin Al-Albani is the founder of Hizbut Tahrir. But what wouldn't hear, Habib Rizal, Dr. Rizal, sorry, what wouldn't hear some opinions from our participant here from India? From India? Is there any kind of Islamic Fakultas movement similar to Indonesia that's operating in India at the moment?
Yes, but the main difference is that Indians are minorities.
Yeah.
So, although we are only 15% of the population, it's a significant, because it's 15% of 1 billion. So that's a considerable number of Muslims. And
you have Jamaat Tabligh as well in India, right?
yes, they're all there, and there's a lot of connections in that sense, in transnational connections.
Yes.
So we have similar organizations like the Wahdatul Ulama.
Right now.
Tablighi Jamaat is actually originating from India.
Yeah, it's originally from India.
And then the Jamaat Islami, that
Jamaat Islami, yeah, the political one. Yeah. No, but Jamaat Islami in India.
yes.
How is this just the terminology? Jamaat al-Islami, yeah. Jamaat al-Islami. But it's more active in Pakistan than India.
Because as a political party, they are much more active in Pakistan because they are majority Muslims.
Yeah.
But in India, because
Does it exist in India? Jamaat
yes,
Islami?
definitely.
So there are some
So the Jamaat Islami in India only joined into politics 3 years ago. So until then, they were much more into dawah. They were much more into social reform.
Okay.
Yes.
The Maulidi, yeah. The founders Maulidi, yeah.
No, definitely. In fact, Jamaat Islami in India has a lot of social power in terms of social activities. Even so now they have TV channels. That's very good.
They are more focused on social activities
Social.
in India.
So only 3 years ago, they formed their first political party.
Which political party?
It's called the Welfare.
The Welfare Party. What about this kind? Minority.
They don't have any seats.
They don't have this.
So it's just 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
And it's very selective in which states or in which constituencies they are.
Alright.
So it's in that. So they are much more, until this political party was formed, even to this day, they are much more focused on lobbying.
I see.
So they would lobby for Muslim causes with existing political parties rather than contesting themselves.
I see. That's interesting.
So Wasim is a research fellow
Okay.
in our faculty.
Right.
So, and now he's doing anthropology of.
I just finished. So it's both of these are new for me. So the theoretical side and the the invasion political side is new for me. So it was a great opportunity. Yeah. But if I can ask a quick question. Yes, of course. So how do these theories work the other way around? So I'm guessing that it would be difficult for these Islamic actors to convince Muslims about the political side. So how would, for example, these people prominent in politics convince ordinary Muslims to be much more engaged in politics? Okay. How would these theories work? Yes, these claims.
Yeah, all right. Can I know your name?
Wasim. Wasim.
Yeah. A brother Russian from India has raised a very interesting question. So it has to do with the potentials of social movements joining electoral participations in Indonesia. My brother Rashid, well, the way these organizations convince people in Indonesia that their cause is worth supporting is not, being movements or organizations that are potential of becoming political parties. I mean, most of them, they are not interested in transforming themselves into a political party. This is, to me, this is interesting, but to the majority of Indonesian scholars, this is something that is not surprising, given the fact that the majority of people are Muslims, and Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah are two biggest mass Islamic organizations in Indonesia, and their support base is drawn to many political parties. There is no one single party that is associated with Nahdlatul Ulama, and there's no one single party that's fully associated with Muhammadiyah. So, yeah, they convince people with their, with their collective action forums, with the ways they are raising their issues and they are raising their framing. For example, when they raise that caliphate is, very important, it is very important to establish caliphate in Indonesia, and they need to follow up by providing rationale to Indonesian people that, hey, if you support our cause, if you support the restoration of the caliphate in Indonesia, the caliphate is an idle political entity in Islam that has been proven in the past. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, right? You will be protected. Your job opportunities will be guaranteed by the government and so on and so on. If you're sick, you don't have to pay the hospital fees and so on and so on. So, as for your questions, I believe that they are doing the logic of social movement activities. They're not promising anything that it could turn into something that can be implemented in the level of governmental policy, for example. They will not promise it to Indonesian public that they are elected in the parliament, they will make it law, for example, or something. Because as for these three past Islamic, the now defunct Islamic organization, they never had any interest in joining electoral participations. And yet, in the context of them, they were quite powerful in mobilizing support. Maybe in India, there is Jamaat Islami, for example, in India, although it's minority, still has a tendency to form a political party that have been introduced into the party, still minority, but in Indonesia, no. Even Nahdlatul Ulama, the biggest mass organization, it only had one experience when it proclaimed that it was a political party in the era of President Sukarno. Yeah, in that 1955 election, Partai, if I'm not mistaken, Partai.
But it was integrated with
Hashimi. Yeah.
But later.
In the beginning, it joined Mashimi, and then after Mashimi was dissolved, it established, split itself. It proclaimed that it is a political party, but it's short-lived. Short-lived.
So I would assume that ever since then, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah would take care to be neutral.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do these players, that was my question, try to convince Nahdlatul Ulama members, Muhammadiyah members that what we're doing is, something feasible, that we may not necessarily always be neutral.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're not convincing. They're not only convincing Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama. They convincing the general public, general Muslims of Indonesia. In fact, formally, Nahdlatul Ulama as an organization does not like the fact that Universitas Indonesia in Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia page the development of HDR and HDR. They don't like it because Nahdlatul Ulama is, really out there for his strong support of the idea of the entire Indonesian state as a national state, as a non-Islamic state. But of course, in reality, we cannot deny that there are some Muslims that have Nahdlatul Ulama background that were eventually attracted to STI's cause, STI's ideology, as well as STI's ideology. But it's quite problematic here. How can one in Indonesia identify themselves to be Nahdlatul Ulama member? We have to classify the definition, right? Whether you are an active, formal member of Nahdlatul Ulama organizations, what is the proof for that? I mean, one can easily identify him or herself as having families with Nahdlatul Ulama members because the ways they are learning Islam is through Nahdlatul Ulama concerts, right? If that is the criteria, and then we can say that the majority of Indonesian Muslims, although they don't belong to members of Nahdlatul Ulama formally, they will say that they have family and Nahdlatul Ulama family background. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, the majority of the subjects of these are having Nahdlatul Ulama's teachings, traditions. Thank you.
Closing. Final question.
Okay, guys. Enough.
Yeah.
One of the ways for these Islamic or to social activities, Kuliah research on the ground. And as far as I know for H.D, I think so organization is totally active in or what do you think? If we look at like we try to do or I think they have like political wings. But we don't know.
That is one of Riza's dissertations, right? Riza, our colleagues, we did our PhD together. Yeah. You're saying you're Riza, yeah? Riza's research is about charitable organization. I still remember that Riza published an article about charitable activity of Hizbut-Tahrir in Aceh. Yeah. Whether Hizbut-Tahrir Indonesia has charitable missions, it has. It actually dispatched charitable mission or humanitarian missions in the wake of Aceh's disaster in 2004. That was part of Riza's publication that he presented. But I don't know the latest trend, whether Hizbut-Tahrir is still consistent in supporting humanitarian causes or not, but I believe that it's not their concern, it's not their focus. They are doing that as their side activities, because it has been clear in the first place
stated in his the so-called constitutions of Hizb ut-Tahrir that his main work is politics. Politics is his main work. So if they have such kind of humanitarian and charitable activities, I believe that as far as it is concerned, that is not their main part of activities. But of course, FBI also has charitable mission. FBI has Ilmu, Hilal Merah Indonesia. You can Google it. The Red Crescents of Indonesia. Ilmu. You can Google it. I think the website of Ilmu, Hilal Merah Indonesia, is still active, and FBI also has this kind of social missions, social activities that are still active up to the present, which is very interesting. Yeah. That's going to be my future research project. Yeah, doing research on analyzing the humanitarian vision of FBI.
Human what?
Humanitarian activities, charitable, Hilal Merah Islam, ya, Hilmi FPI. Maybe one last question, Dr. Rijal.
Pak Tilak, maybe you want to lecture Habib also. Is the Dr. Habib?
Oh, Dr. Habib. Academic Habib. Academic Habib here, ya. Masya Allah, Masya Allah.
I forgot to mention that he's also a brother.
Oh yeah, I know. I told him because I know someone. But I'm very friend with someone who is also Munabari.
Oh really? But Munabari is not a Habib fam, ya. Habib fam.
Very close to him. Very close.
Okay, I think we have reached the end of our lecture today. I mean, for the first session. First session is so I think we can learn a lot from the first session. Theory is in the future, some of you are to know more about different theories. We can see references that we share. So we send this one.
Of course. Yeah, that would be great.
So again, thanks so much. Give a big applause to. For the next session, are you going to waste? Or I think it's better to have lunch and then you accompany them for second session. I mean, there are some of you haven't presented theoretical frameworks. What do this is proposed? I think
Kalau bisa present lagi Pak itu lagi. Itu baru udah siap Pak.
oh sorry, itu so what is ready? What did you discuss?
Already discussed or
Yes.
Oh,
only for the session one.
So two part already with this presentation, but already say it's enough for the
Okay, so no one present for this today. I mean, okay, we can combine it. I mean, for next week. I mean, for the second session. I think it would be good if there are two presenters. I mean, because we have to finish our at least in the mid of June. So make sure that we have completed all. So for next week, since Pak Nur Haidi is not here, he is still in UK, also Pak Zezek, so I think we can jump to the next topic for next week, or be anthropology of Islam. Okay, so will you be ready for next week? Okay. You should be ready. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.